Hi everyone, this is Kevin Bernatz of Doc Beer Nuts Development, and we are going to look at Hubris, Twilight of the Hellenistic World by Morgane and for GMT Games. This is dealing with the Eastern Med. You have Greece and Asia Minor, and then the Middle East and the Egypt area with the three kingdoms that were predominant at the period of time, which is basically the years 220 BC to about 165 BC. And those three kingdoms are the Macedonians, which are the purple, centered around Macedonia. The Seleucids, which are centered around Babylonia and Seleucus, and they are yellow. And then the Ptolemies, which are, of course, centered around Egypt, and they are the light blue. In addition, there are several minors, which we call these the banners. So you have minors that are, Pergamon, Rhodes, Sparta, and so on. And then you also have mercenaries, which are these darker colored circles, and you have colonists or military colonists, which are these lighter colored circles. So this is a colonist associated with the satrapy of Phrygia, and I probably will butcher many of these names, and I'm sure at some point I will call them the Ptolemies instead of the Ptolemies, so I will apologize up front. This first video is just going to break down a little bit of the initial gameplay and just briefly go through a turn, not actually moving pieces, but just conceptually how the turn would work. This is the setup for the campaign game, which starts currently it's on turn 7, which is the 220 to 196. I'm sorry, 220 to 216 turn. All turns are 5 years in period. And let's pull up the sequence of play before I start. So each turn follows essentially 6 steps. The first steps, you're going to prepare the different decks. So one deck will be the event deck, and that has a series of events. You have you have a winter quarters, which basically signals the end of the turn. If there are at least 4 reoccurrent events that have already occurred, there are a total of 6 in every deck. Let's see if I can show you a reoccurrent event. So reoccurrent events look like this. So they have along the top a sequence of activation. So in this case, Ptolemy, Seleucid, Macedon, and then Rome if Rome is active. The middle part will include a random occurrence. So these random occurrences reoccur, hence the name reoccurrent events. And like I said, there's 6 total in each year, 4 of which will definitely come up, but it could be a different 4 from the previous turn. So each event doesn't necessarily occur every turn, but they do reoccur in some sort of repetitive process. And then at the bottom, there's another game function. In this case, this one has what's called intrigues at court. So some of these game processes are intrigues at court, which if your court is too large, you may have people run afoul of the king and end up getting eliminated. If you have generals that are out and about and are getting too big for their britches, they may rebel. That's another event. Your ships may just wear out. Ships of this period were not indefinite in their lifespan. So that's another event. You check all ships to see if, or squadrons as we call them. And then there's a few other events. If there's one dealing with the Punic Wars and one dealing with just checking to see if leaders have died. And so those are some of the events that will occur, or the game mechanics that will occur on these event cards. And then other than the recurrent events and the winter quarters, what you have are the regular events. And I'll get into them in more detail when we get into actual gameplay. But for example, this one advances the Punic Wars. And Some of them will affect, you see the red variable at the bottom. Some will affect the Roman belligerents. It'll go up and down. The more belligerents Rome is, the easier it is to piss them off, in which case they will declare war on you. The Punic Wars has an effect on this. If Hannibal is doing well, then obviously Rome is got their hands full. If they've conquered Hannibal, then Roman belligerence is basically uncapped. You add these back. So each year, you pull this up, you'll see each year there are a certain number of event cards. I forget how many. So in this, there'll be 1, 2, 3, 6 event cards added. This year there's 3, so I would say on average 3 to 6 events are added each year, or each turn. And again, you can see turns are broken down into 5-year periods. So let's go back to the sequence of play. So you basically shuffle your event decks. All Roman war cards, which basically dictate how Rome activates, are shuffled, and then people bring in new leaders. So I have those sort of set off to the side here. So this is, the Macedon leader deck. And each leader will have a card something like this. And so the blue is the date of arrival, the date when they kind of first can take command. So in this case, Nicanor, he can assume command in the year 208. And so that would be turn 11. I'm sorry, no, turn 9. So on turn 9, he would be added to the Macedon court. And each leader is going to be different. So this leader has a campaign rating. He's got 3 and a 2 associated with a campaign. He's got a 2 diplomacy. The Seleucid leader, Antiochus the Younger, well, he's a 4 and a 2. He's one of the better leaders, and he has a 3 admin. And a lot of these leaders will have special abilities. In this case, the Younger has the Wing Commander ability. And if you notice at the bottom, there's 2 other numbers. The top one is their loyalty, and the higher is better. 7 is basically the highest. And the bottom is their intrigue. And intrigue is a mixed bag. If they're king, you want your intrigue to be high, because it basically means they're able to handle a large court and handle the intrigues associated with a court. But if they're not the king, you want their intrigue low, because that means they're not stirring up a lot of trouble. So Antiochus, when he's not the king, he's potentially causing trouble. And when he is the king, though, he can handle his court fairly well. And then here's the Ptolemies. They have a leader coming actually next turn. And finally, there's several leaders that we call them unaffiliated. These are leaders associated with maybe different minor kingdoms or different events, and they can come and play, as you see here, by event. And finally, there's these succession cards. They come into play when a king has died. There's generally something that is disruptive to the court. And so each one has its own. Each is unique. They can be result in rebellions. They can result in loss of territory, and so on and so forth. So that's the deck preparation phase. Then you calculate your revenue. And so revenue is, if you look at the satrapies, let me blow it up a little bit. We'll look at Mysia. So Mysia is a satrapy, and it has 3 of these rectangle, or 3 of these squares. And the squares are places, as well as these circles are places. Circles are tribes, squares are cities. And so a satrapy has its name. If it is worth victory points, it'll have victory points in sort of an oval. And depending on who's in the oval, it says who gets victory points. So Mysia, Ionia Lydia has all 3 colors, so everyone gets these victory points. In some places like Peloponnese, the victory points are different. So for Seleucids, they're maximum 1 victory point. For the Ptolemies and Macedon, it's a 1 or 2 victory points depending on the level of control. And let's see if there's one that has only 1 person for victory points. I don't know if there is. I think, oh yeah, so like Atropine is half a victory point, but only the Seleucids can earn that. Then you have underneath it is the tax value. So if it's a simple control, which basically, it's more than half. So in this case, you would need 2 of the 3 places are controlled by someone. They would earn the leftmost number and get the leftmost VP. If they control everything, they would get the rightmost number and the rightmost VP. And then the final, the laden donkey is or the laden horse. That's the supply value. So if you're fighting or campaigning into Mysia, it's going to cost you 3 talents per unit you bring, basically. And there's some modifiers to this if you're the king and so on. And that's each satrapy is sort of rated this way. We have satrapy cards. And so if you look, let's just look here. So here's 3 satrapy cards. They're all with the green side face up, and it shows that means they have full control. So just from these 3 cards, the Seleucids, we're in the Seleucid court. You look at the yellow number, so that'd be 3, 1, and 1. So they would have 5 victory points from these 3 satrapies. And then you look at the full tax value. So they would have 7, 3, and 2, which would give them 12 talents. If you look at this one, which is basically turned upside down, now the vassal, unfortunately, when you zoom in, it doesn't rotate it. You can't do it individually. You either have to have everything the same direction or let vassal rotate everything so that it's normal facing. But in this, you would look at the simple control, and so they would get 3 tax value instead of 5, or 3 revenue instead of 5, due to having only simple control of this satrapy. And we also give the tax base that all the kingdoms start out each scenario, and I record that here. Just people can track it this way, or just use the cards to track as things change. So looking back at the sequence of play, revenue phase, each kingdom collects their tax value. If they're at war, they halve that. So in this particular scenario, the Seleucids start at war with the Ptolemies, and so conversely, the Ptolemies start at war with the Seleucids. So each of these 2 kingdoms would half their revenue. Macedon would get their full revenue, and you would just increase the treasury accordingly. So, Seleucids had 21, while half of that is 10.5, which rounds down. So it's 10. So it would go up to 20. I'm pretty sure it rounds down. Let me see. Once you've added all half them out, I'll round up the total. That's what I get for not checking first. So 21 would round up to 11. They have 10 at start, so they would go up to 21 for their talents. Then you do a random change to the Roman belligerents. It can either be nothing or go up or down. And again, this can be capped depending how Hannibal's doing against Rome. Then everyone bids for mercenaries. And this is just a free-flowing bid. Minimum bid is 2 talents. If 2 people bid the same number, so there's no, let's say we have this Mysian, actually that's a bad one. Let's say we have this Thracian, because the Ptolemies, so you look at the back of the mercenary and it says which satrapies they belong to. So Illyria, Macedonia, and Thrace. If you control a place in any of those 3 satrapies, you could bid to basically get ownership for the turn of this mercenary. Well, the Ptolemies and Macedon both have control of a place, so maybe Macedon starts saying, okay, I'll bid 2 talents. Ptolemies might say, okay, I bid 3. Macedon says, I'll bid 3 as well. Well, if Ptolemies let that end, then it's a d6 roll random to see who actually gets the mercenary and pays, the other person doesn't. But Ptolemies could say, no, I bid 48, or whatever, and of course then they would get the mercenary. They'd flip it face up, and it would start in one of its territories where the Ptolemies have a place, and then it could move by sea, or it could stay there. Maybe they decide to put it in Ionia Lydia. But that's how the bidding process works for mercenaries. So it's fairly straightforward and fairly quick. especially as players get used to it. A lot of these mercenaries, there's going to be no competing bids. So like this mercenary, it's only these two areas. Well, the only people that have places are rebel, which they never bid, and then Ptolemy. So the only person who can really bid on it is Ptolemy. Like here, the only person, well, for this one, the only person is Macedon, the one from the Peloponnese, because the Ptolemies start with Sparta, they could bid on that. So you'll find out that for the mercenary biddings, generally it happens very quickly. It's a very quick step, and there's no real delay just with the back and forth bidding that one might think. And then we get to the heart, which is the action phase. I'll sort of skip over that for now and just jump to the end of the turn. So the end of the turn, once you've done all the action phase, you're basically just resetting the board. So stuff that has fought ends up in this dispersed box here, and it goes back home basically. So you have a royal army. Let's see, where's the Ptolemy royal army? It's going to be down here in there. So the Ptolemy royal army, let's say it fought and it was dispersed. Well, it would go back to any place that has or any satrapy that has a Ptolemy place in it. So maybe they want to put it in the Plusiastic Mouth, or maybe Quell Syria. And the same with the siege train, and any of these colonists would go back home. Actually, for the vassal module, it's you just flip them back over and then right click and return home, and they go right back home where they started. And so you're basically just setting up the board for the next turn. The only big thing is this war exhaustion. So if two kingdoms are at war, at the end of every turn, war basically ends. So let's see where I have that. All wars between kingdoms end unless one king wishes it not to end. So at the end of the turn, here it is. That's what I was looking for. At the end of the turn, wars end automatically, unless someone either both want to continue, in which case it continues automatically, or if one wants to continue, then they have to make a successful diplomacy check with one of their leaders. And there's certain modifiers and so on. If war continues for whatever reason, then the chief minister has to do an administration check. So remember, that's the admin rating. So that would be like the 4 on Antikos Megas. But here, the chief minister is actually here. You can see chief minister. So all the kingdoms start with a king and a chief minister, and they all have different rank. Like here, this chief minister has a 4 diplomacy and a 4 admin. And going back to the charts, basically you can end up getting revolts. You can lose victory points. It can be bad to be at war for an extended period of time. And so historically wars were fairly short and end up in peace without 10, 15 years, drawing them along kind of thing. So that's the end of the turn. And then the action phase I'll go over in a separate video, but it is the heart of the game. It's where you're drawing these events, you're resolving the events. Players are using diplomacy to try to take control of places. They're using campaigns to take control of them militarily. They may start a war, you may end a war. All that happens in the action phase. And so hopefully you have gotten at least a little bit of an overview of Hubris. I guess I'd like to just end a little bit with Rome. So the way Rome works is we have basically Roman guidelines, and a player will control Rome based on their influence in the Roman Senate. So right now the game starts with only the Ptolemies' influence. So as long as the Ptolemies aren't at war with Rome, they would be the ones controlling what Rome does within the guidelines, right? So there's going to be restrictions on what they can do, but they will get to implement Rome. Now, if there's other people in the Senate, then it's, there's other factors that come into play. Who controls the Romans? Basically victory points. The person lowest in victory points, if you're tied in the Senate, would get control of Rome. So it's sort of a little bit of a crux to help people who are lowest in the victory points. They at least get to control, exactly where Rome goes if there's multiple options. A lot of times there won't be multiple options. Rome is fairly straightforward on what it wants to do. But if Rome is at war, then they're going to start with a consul, and he'll start in Italia, and he'll start basically marching through to conquer whoever he wants to conquer. And Rome gets to war either through events. Certain events will trigger a casus belli, or players can attack Roman-controlled places, which would trigger a casus belli. Or if this Roman belligerence goes up to aggression, and then it's, as you see here, that they go to war, excuse me, on a 5 or a 6. Where Rome attacks is based on their agenda or their scope of action, basically, and this changes by event. They start off really centered around this area. They'll then move to Greece, and eventually they'll move to the entire map. And then the Punic Wars are controlled by these different steps. As the one event I turned over, it basically means bring it to the next step. And that tracks the progression of the Punic Wars. There's a chance that Hannibal will conquer Rome, in which case Rome is basically treated as out of the game. That it is very rare. I think they need to roll a 6 in order to do that. Now, Macedon can potentially influence that, but not easily. And that, like I said, is where we're at prior to describing the action phase, and I will get into that in a separate video.